I'm Karina Tech, author of Scolio-Pilates, and we're going to show you today how to wedge for a four curve. So briefly, let's go over what a four curve is, and if you need a longer explanation, check out our four curve video. So very briefly, four curves. We have your head. We have a curve in the neck, which is hard to see. We have a curve in the thoracic or mid-back, which is usually easier to see. We have a curve in the lumbar, also generally easy to see. We have a little change, dink, right here, right before your spine meets the pelvis. And here's your pelvis. Oh, that's a little better than the last video. So we have a neck or cervical curve. We have a thoracic or mid-back curve. We have a lumbar curve or low back curve. And we have the L5-S1 change. So L5-S1 change. It's actually not a bad thing to have more curves. It just means that the spine is beautifully compensating. If you have 3 curves or you have 4 curves or some people have 6 curves, it means the spine is doing everything it can to just come up to straight. It's not a bad thing. It's a very, very good thing. It keeps us highly functional. It's really good. So with the 3 curve, the neck would go to the left, the thoracic would go to the right, the lumbar goes to the left, and the hip usually decides, for the 3 curve, the hip decides to stay on the left with the lumbar. With the 4 curve, the hip decides to compensate one more time, and so it moves over to the right. That's all that means. It's very, very similar to a 3 curve. It only has a slight decision change down at the pelvis. Again, instead of staying on the left with the lumbar, it moves over to the right. Okay, let me show you how to wedge for this. Okay, moving on. So here's our 4 curve spine, kind of. So it looks just like a 3 curve, especially with this model, because this model doesn't allow us to move the hips. So remember with a 3 curve that we'll have the cervical curve, we'll have the thoracic, and we'll have the lumbar, and with the 3 curve, the hip will glide out to the left. With the 4 curve, it'll glide out to the right. This model, it doesn't do that. So again, with the 4 curve, if this is my spine, we have a hip gliding over to the right, we have a left lumbar, a right thoracic or mid-back, and then the neck curve, correcting the head, the skull, towards neutral so that my eyes are level. It's very, very unusual that someone will look at you this way. So the neck works to correct you back to level. All right, so from here, we want to wedge for a 4 curve. It's going to be very similar to a 3 curve with some little nuances. So with a 4 curve, generally what we end up doing is we wedge just for the lumbar spine, not for the pelvis. And then we wedge the pelvis on the opposite side. Maybe. I know it gets tricky with 4. So from here, we're going to go here, and then we're going to go here, for sure. The question mark is about the pelvis. Are we going to wedge underneath, a little bit underneath the right side of the pelvis, or not? So let's get started, and I'll show you what determines that. So we'll go onto our backs. I'll grab my little wedges. Do my best not to scare Gus off. I need you to move your nose, buddy. Okay. All right. So from here, I'm going to go left lumbar, no pelvis. I'm going to go right thoracic with my larger wedge. You might decide it needs to be a smaller wedge if it's too much correction there. I'm going to place my feet, put the big toe down, the big toe knuckle down, anchor the inside heel, and rotate as hard as I can with my legs. When I rotate as hard as I can with my legs, I'm going to look at my pelvis. If it's neutral, no wedge. If the right hip is still back, then you wedge. But do not wedge it until you've rotated and you've looked. That's important. Okay, from here, everything else is the same as your 3 curve. Pretty easy. We go right and we go left. I'm going to put my arm right on this wedge that's sticking out from my left lumbar, and I'm going to push on it. My right arm is going to push on the mat, or it's going to push on Gus because he's there. And I'm going to push down with both to activate the muscles of the spine. I'm going to elongate, and I'm going to breathe. All right? So that's your wedging and supine for forecurve. Let's go on to side lying. Now side lying and forecurve is a little tricky because we have this hip that wants to go to the right. So if I lie on the left side, gravity pulls down the left ribs. Perfect. Now it's pushing my hips even more to the right. Not so perfect. So how do we work with this? Well, we either don't do side lying, which is always an option, or we work with it. So the way that I work with it is I'm going to put you on your right side. So the pelvis glides to the left. Then from here, I'm going to not allow my ribs to touch the mat on the other side. Because if I let the ribs touch the mat on the other side, it just sinks into the curve that I already have there. So I'm going to keep them up and move to neutral. It's going to look like this. And I'm not going to use the wedges here. It's going to confuse the issue. Okay, so on my right hip, that likes to protrude. He's so patient. All right, so down we go. My left hip, I'm going to take it over this bar, is here. My right hip is getting pushed towards neutral. Very perfect. I'm not going to allow my right ribs to touch. My left arm is going to rest on my leg. And this leg, this top leg, never drops down. Actually, let me change that thought. This leg is going to drop down. Sorry. So I was thinking of another curve. All right, so we're going to go down with the left and up. And we're going to go down with the left and up. We're going to keep the right ribs off. Let me make sure I'm thinking of that right. Yeah, okay. So right ribs up, and the left leg can go down and up. Now you might find that it's just too tight in this hip to touch the mat here. That's because these muscles have been a little bit in a shorter shape if your hips go to the right. So if you can't touch the mat here, don't force it. Just go down, feel a tiny stretch, and come back up. Go down, feel a tiny stretch, and come back up. Okay, that's forecurve. You're on the protruding hip, you're not letting these ribs touch. You're elongating, you're elongating, you're elongating. That's number one. Always elongate. Okay, prone. Again, in prone, we're going to use our handy dandy K2 wedge. At home, you can use a foam roller. You can use a little stool that children stand on to brush their teeth, to wash their dishes. That doesn't happen in our house. Okay, so from here, you're going to do very similar wedging to what you did for 3 curve. The legs are automatically rotated in the position, knees apart, heels together. And then once you're there, your curve, your wedging will look very much like 3 curve. So my hips are here. When I stand at my feet or at my feet or my head, I'll see if one hip needs to be lifted. It's often the right one, so that goes underneath the right hip. And then from here, the wedge is going to go underneath the left ribs. And then I'm going to have another wedge underneath my right shoulder. So it looks like this. This elongated position is going to move us towards neutral so that we can breathe. Remember, all the muscles change shape with scoliosis. And to begin to push them back towards neutral can be as simple as elongating and breathing. The diaphragm is a very strong muscle, and it's a major stabilizer of the spine. So please don't leave out the breathing. And you can focus on the exhale, not the inhale. And that's another video. Okay, I hope this has helped. It's some very basic instruction on how to use these wedges and how to get started. Your number one rule, as always, is to check with your doctor. Don't do anything that doesn't feel good. And leave me a note. I'd love to know that, that things are going well for you, or answer your questions if you have them. If you have scoliosis, you can get your life back. Get outside, even go surfing. If you have scoliosis, you can do the really fun things that you love without pain, like hug a tree, even climb a tree. Hippocrates says that nature itself is the best physician. Get outside, go for a walk. Your very own scolio puppy will thank you. And you'll be happy. I'm Karina Tech, Scolio Girl. I've spent my fair share of time learning to deal with my own scoliosis. And a big thank you to John for recording our videos for us. And from Scolio Puppy and me, we say bye, and we hope to see you soon. Take care.